Hey friends, this is Brad Apple, and this is my friend Adam Fudge. Today he's going to talk to us about joining Southern Connection after Scott Vestal was hired by Doyle Lawson.
Well, I think that would have been the first time I crossed paths with Scott Vestal was at your dad's festival. That would have been about 1980, I think. But Scott was playing with some of his contemporaries around where he lived. Mark Keller and all them, they were playing together some. And I kind of lost touch with them. And I see it was sometime in 1985, early 1985, Mark got my phone number, I think, from Richard Bailey, and he wanted to know if I'd be interested in playing in a band with him and around Asheville, North Carolina. And I had found out that that band was the Southern Connection, which consisted of Mark Keller, Scott and Curtis Vestal, and Russell Moore, yeah. And so I had to give it a whirl. You know, I was young, I was chasing a dream. He paid for bus fare over there. If I just come over and jam, pick with him a few days, see how, you know, we gelled. Went over there and we rehearsed and this and that. And right off the bat, he started kind of saying, now Scott played it like this, Scott played it like that, and I had to finally just tell him, look, if you want Scott Vestal, you need to get Scott Vestal. No way I can fill in Scott Vestal's shoes. I mean, you know, it's just, this guy was already established. I mean, he'd gone on with Doyle Lawson. Scott and Curtis and Russell, all three, got hired on by Doyle Lawson at the time, and Mark was trying to reform Southern Connection. So they made a lot of big, grandiose promises. They had several festivals lined up for that summer. And a couple of days later, Doug Campbell came in. He was no veteran bass player from that. By that time, he was already a veteran professional. He upright bass player and electric bass player, could play them both equally well. He's the best combination bass player I ever played with, as far as in that regard. And we auditioned a number of mandolin players. Roscoe Morgan played with the son, but he had other commitments. I was really hoping they might hire him, because I really liked his playing and his singing, and still do. But we ended up hiring Chris Austin, who later on went with Ricky Skaggs, did a couple of years, I think, with him, and then started playing for Reba McEntire, and tragically got killed in a plane crash with Reba's other band members. But you know, we were all young, we were all chasing the dream. We had some marathon practice sessions, I'll assure you. There were some days, you know, it'd be 6 to 8 hours, and then go play the show that night, and you'd be just worn completely out by the end of all that. But it was an interesting experience, to say the least.
I bet. What was it like working with Doug Campbell?
Oh, it was great. I mean, he was a barrel of monkeys. The guy had an incredible groove. He could find the pocket. If you were out of time, it was because you were out of time, not because of him. He held the groove there solid, and he could do about anything on the bass that was humanly possible. Yeah, he was a great musician. He had some interesting ideas as well. And, you know, we generally, with him being the oldest one, we listened to him because he had been in the scene for quite a while. As a matter of fact, he was a world champion bass player. I didn't realize they had such a contest, but in 1973 and 74, 2 years in a row there, he was a world champion. I think it was at Union Grove Fiddlers Convention they used to hold that. But I said, how do you judge a bass player? And he said, well, you get up there and play a couple of numbers. You know, one of them, they judge you on your ability to work in the band. In the second tune, they'd let you showboat, double slap, triple slap, and things like that. And he said, by the time I got through with my round, he said, my fingertips were bleeding. But he must have made quite an impression on him, but he beat several bass players from what I understand. I wasn't there. I didn't get to hear it, but I'm sure it was quite a sight.
Yeah. Now, Doug, I understand you told me that he tried out for Seldom Seen one time too.
Yes, he did. From what I understood, he had the job, and they had two to pick from at that time. One was Doug, the other one would have been T. Michael Coleman. And T. Michael actually convinced Doug to decline the position. And Doug went on to do other things, and T. Michael Coleman started playing the Seldom Seen, from what I understood. Yeah, there was a lot of music going on over there. The bluegrass music, progressive bluegrass music, was a completely different realm than what it is around here back in those days. That was evident to me very quickly once I got over there. But yeah, I learned a lot. We didn't make a lot of money. I wasn't there really long enough to make much money at it.
How long did it last? How long?
Oh, I was there, I think about 3 months. Everything fell apart. I had a lot of friction in the band. Ego conflicts, mainly with our guitar player and mandolin player. I won't really go into all that, but yeah, we were just young. We didn't. In order to try to do it as your profession, you really need a good agent, and which we didn't have. But we had a lot of fun. But anyway, I was glad to get back home, needless to say. See, I first went to Winfield in 1981. I went there from 1981 till 87, and it was different than what it is now. I mean, you'd see the iconic figures back then. That was the first time I got to see Tony Rice, was in 83. And that was one of the first shows, if I'm not mistaken, that White Rice played with Tony. So it was Tony and White Rice, John Reichman, and Todd Phillips. And it was quite an experience, that was. They were releasing Backwaters almost, well, I mean, it was very shortly. If it wasn't already released, they were about to. But yeah, he was debuting his Backwaters album primarily. He didn't sing a vocal number all weekend. It was all instrumentals. But I was sitting there trying to take all this in. Back then, we didn't have the internet other than the album covers. We barely even knew what these guys looked like, and we weren't seeing them on TV. And the first time I saw Tony Rice on stage live, I couldn't believe that he was getting his right hand technique. What a mechanism his right hand was. He was rolling that thumb and index finger. I thought, there's no way he can do that. And I was just spellbound. Get to see one of the legends. And I might add, he was in his peak long about that time. I don't know that he ever played any better. And it was interesting to get to see, workshops and all that. The workshop was Dan Crary, Tony Rice, Dudley Murphy, and Mark O'Connor. And everybody was expecting to see some kind of bloodbath. Those guys were pretty competitive. But it wasn't that at all. Tony, he was a real class act. He just answered people's questions and just played it cool. He just played basically the melody to everything. He played tunes like Gold Rush and Jerusalem Ridge and such as that. Some of the stuff off the Church Street Blues album. But yeah, he was not showboating at all. But Mark O'Connor, on the other hand, was flashing everybody's eyes out. And I think all the guitar players that were entering the contest wanted to see them cut each other's heads. It didn't turn out that way at all. Tony just played it cool. He was playing an Adamas 12-string acoustic electric, and getting 30-second note runs on it. I couldn't believe that. I mean, of course, he's a prodigy, no doubt about it. He was playing circles around everybody else, but Tony said, I'm sure we're not coming in this thing as a competition. But all the gunslingers out in the crowd, they were whooping and hollering. O'Connor was their boy in that little show. But,
People want Tony to sing during his set?
Yes, they kept hollering for him to sing and everything, and he just blew it off. But he finally explained to everybody, look, if you're expecting to hear me sing this weekend, you're going to be disappointed because we're debuting my Backwaters album. We're playing acoustic jazz, basically. I don't really have an ensemble here that I feel comfortable doing vocal numbers with. So I'm not going to do it, basically. But it was good to see those guys. So like I said, we didn't have the internet back then. In 1983, so we barely even knew what the guys looked like. But it was a real treat to get to see the legends like that play live.
Talk about the sound of Reichman's mandolin.
Oh my goodness, man! It was that mandolin is very unique, even among the Lloyd Loar series of F5s, that master model. It was very balanced. It had a sweetness of tone, very wide tone, and of course John's technique enhanced all that. And they had good sound techs at that festival. They knew what all these acoustic instruments were supposed to sound like. They really did. I was thankful for that. And I've got some cassette tapes I record on of all things, this little Pioneer boombox. I need to see if they'll even still play. But see, they had I think back then 4 different stages, and they did an afternoon show and over at another stage, and the equipment wasn't nearly as good as at the grand stage. And they had basically a knob jockey out there trying to anticipate everybody's solo instead of leaving it alone, letting the guys handle the dynamics from the stage. And it kept cracking and popping, and Tony was visibly upset. He really was. But they finally got it lined out, but it was too late. He was already upset with the whole development. Yeah, I was just standing out there in the crowd. This fellow walks up. Who's this band here? And I turn around and look, it's Todd Phillips, I said, well, I don't really know, Todd. It was one of the, lesser known bands. He said, well, they're really good. And I got to talk to him. I said, Tony seemed a little upset. Did your afternoon show? He said, oh, yeah. He said he was pretty pissed off. He's back at the motel room right now, probably sulking, He said he'll be like that the rest of the day. But they really put on it was tremendous acoustic music the guys played. To see somebody play to that level, and considering they're out there in the heat, it was really hot that day, even though it was September. But the thing about Kansas, it can be 90 degrees during the day, and as soon as that sun sets, you can see your breath. And they played equally well at the evening show, even though it was cold. I thought, man, these guys are pros. But Winfield was a completely different thing then. I entered the banjo contest from 1981 till 87. I never won it. I got second twice and third twice. But now at least one of the guys that I placed behind, it was no disgrace. Dan Crary one year did a solo act the whole weekend. He played Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night. And I don't recall him repeating a tune twice. He did a little bit of singing, but I thought, man, this guy, he's got nerves of steel. Stand out there You know, in the play, you got all these professional grade guitarists watching you. You know, all the contestants. That used to be, it was a big deal, man, especially for guitar. All these guys sitting there watching every move you make, and I don't remember hearing him make a mistake all weekend. He was in top form then, you know, Dan was. But man, he was playing all those Celtic fiddle tunes and his arrangements, things like Devil's Dream and all that, you know, man, any number of other things. But yeah, that's a higher level of musicianship for a man to sit there and flat pick for an hour a set, and never repeat the same tune twice all weekend. He had quite a repertoire. Yeah, that was another deal. I did, other than the album covers, we barely knew what those guys looked like. That was when he was a quartet. It was David Grisman, Darrell Anger, Mike Marshall, who had by then was playing guitar with him, and Rob Wasserman. And the level of energy, I can't even describe it to you. You just have to hear it. That was unbelievable what those guys could do. Yeah, I think Mark O'Connor had just left him. He'd had a injury due to a skiing accident. I think he'd gotten a broken arm out of the deal. And Mike just switched over playing guitar. I'd never heard him play guitar. I was blown away. I mean, I thought, man, this guy can do it all, you know. But he hadn't been playing the guitar slot just a couple of 3 months, I think, at that point. And, you know, playing all these intricate arrangements and everything, you know, that Grisman drilled him on. But, yeah, that's some real musicians there. Yeah. Well, you know, Tony is he was one of the most influential acoustic guitarists of the 20th century. It'd be hard to play bluegrass guitar or progressive bluegrass guitar and not steal a lick or two from him, you know, because he revolutionized bluegrass guitar. You know, before he came along, you know, you had people like Doc Watson, and, you know, and then a little later on Clarence White, who were both influences of Tony's. But Tony, he really brought it to the mainstream. I mean, his music was growing by leaps and bounds then, you know. And the thing about it, I've never seen a band yet that Tony was ever in that remained the same after he left. His combination of his rhythm playing and his lead playing, I mean, it left a hole in the music after he left. You know, no band was ever the same after Tony left. But man, there's a lot of people that can play everything note for note what he did, but it's still not the same. It's not going to be the same. But you know, there's just some people musically you can't replace. But I don't know where this whole thing is headed, but I would hope that they would retain some of the traditional stuff and not let it slip through the cracks. But yeah, you don't hear anybody sing like Bill Monroe did in his prime. Not nowadays. They don't have the power. They don't have the strength of character that he had to have just to survive. You know, a lot of people nowadays don't do manual work like those guys did when they were young. You know, that developed them and their strength physically and mentally that a lot of people don't experience now. I think that hard scrabble way of life really cements a person's conviction in music. They knew they had to be good or they was going to have to go back to that old, what they were doing. You know, Monroe was working in oil refineries and such, and before that he was making cross ties by hand. You know, that's some back-breaking work. But I think that's the main difference. They were just used to a harder way of life, and they had more strength of character. and it came through. That's a different era, but that's my take on that. As you know, there's no big amount of money in this type of music. You have to love the music. It gets in your blood. Well, you know, as Monroe says, you gotta love it. But I listened to Bill Monroe from the get-go. I thought one day I'd like to try a stint with him, but it never came to pass. But it's a lifelong study, as you know. And now, 47 years later, still trying to learn more. I don't aim to give it up anytime soon if I never make one more penny at it. Because it's just part of, you know how it is, it's just part of what you live for.
What would you think how music's changed since you started in the early days, say 80s, early 90s to now?
I'll try to be as tactful as I can on that. Well, in my opinion, this is my opinion, the bands of today, their music don't have the soul, the feel, the drive that what we knew growing up. And the music has to evolve, there's no doubt. You know, nobody wants to hear footprints in the snow for 100 years and never change. But, you know, the first generation of bluegrass, Bill Monroe, Flatt and Scruggs, Jimmy Martin, all them like that, those individuals had a strength of character you don't see nowadays. They had a harder way of life growing up, and I think that made them that much stronger. You can hear the conviction in their music that you don't hear nowadays. It's all about glitz and glamour nowadays, in my opinion. I don't particularly enjoy what they're calling bluegrass nowadays. If I had to play what's current just to make a living, I'd just quit playing. But there's something about, and also all the guys we listened to growing up, you know, Tony Rice, Sam Bush, you know, the second generation, I guess you might say, Sam Bush, Tony Rice, of course, J.D. Crowe, all those guys like that, the iconic figures. I haven't heard anybody push the envelope past them now. And don't get me wrong, there is some unbelievable musicians out there. You know, Bela Fleck has done this Bluegrass Heart tour and everything. I've never heard such musicianship out of a bunch of guys. I'm not throwing them in as ones I'm saying I don't particularly enjoy, because I do enjoy that. But I'm talking about the bands. They're really highly polished and everything. They're very sophisticated harmonies and such, but it does not raise the goose pimples on me like the old guys did. You know, Ralph Stanley, another one, you know. They just don't have the same, well, for lack of a better term, the same punch and depth and drive the old timers did. And maybe that's just a part of development, you know, when, like we were talking about earlier when I was playing with Southern Connection, we did a lot of progressive stuff. You know, I was quite a bit younger then, you know. We did a lot of stuff that I probably wouldn't even think of doing nowadays. But we were looking for something different. And the music does have to evolve somewhat, but I think a lot of them get too far away from it. And there is a market for traditional bluegrass nowadays, whether people want to admit it or not. You can gauge that by the audience response. You go up here and you do the hard driving, old traditional stuff, the songs that people knew when they were growing up, and watch your response. But a lot of newer bands, they get up there, you know, after each number, but you play Flat and Scruggs, Monroe, and all that. Don Reno, Red Smiley, some of the things from that era. You hear people holler and whistle at the end of those numbers. But always gauge. That's the way I gauge if I'm reaching the crowd or not, by their response after each number. And I still contend, even though a lot of people say, oh, you've got to get past the old stuff. Who wants to do that anymore? Well, who wants to do a bunch of jacked up stuff that don't reach anybody? And that's just my view on it. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's me. You mentioned about Mark Jones. Of course, he's a dear friend of mine. He told me some really interesting stories, and one of which was, I'll just set this up. After String Bean was murdered, he and his wife Estelle, he said everything changed around Nashville. The stars no longer would put their name on their mailbox, and things like that. They were just scared that something might happen to them, or somebody might try to shake them down for money or rob them. Mark told me, long about that time and all that happened, Grandpa said, well, I think we need to get us a guard dog. And somebody around the Nashville area raised legit German Shepherds. They went and picked him a pup out. He was solid black. And he named him Brutus. And the fellow told him that raised him, I don't remember what his name was, but he told Grandpa, you come by and get acquainted with him and bond with him. And he said, and I think they took him home when Brutus was about 6 months old. But he was a high-blooded guard dog, and he was just wherever Grandpa was, Brutus was when they were around the house. He was just another family member. And I know one night they were playing the Grand Ole Opry, and they would let Brutus out, while they were gone. They came back from the Opry, and they found what was left of a pair of Levi's laying in the driveway and a blood trail going to the back of the fence. And Grandpa said, well, looks like old Brutus got to greet one of our intruders tonight. But Mark said that one of the things the trainer told him gave him an option. He said, now, every so often, I'll send one of my guys over and we'll do a home invasion drill. He said, well, yeah, we can do that. He said, well, I'll tell you what, at 3 p.m. sharp tomorrow, we'll drop off our guy over there, and he'll come in your house, move everything out of the front room that you don't want broken. Well, why is that? And he said, you'll see. And he said, he'll be wearing a bite suit, by the way. And of course, Brutus, according to Mark, he was a big dog. I think somewhere around maybe 100 pounds. That's a big German Shepherd, and real athletic on top of it. And he said the next day they were sitting there, Brutus right beside Grandpa, Grandpa's in a recliner. At 3 p.m. sharp, Brutus raised up, starts growling in his ears, on alert. He went to the front room, and they said they heard the awfulest racket you've ever heard in your life. And Mark said that beat anything I've ever seen. He said that dog, I thought he was going to kill the guy with a bite suit on. He said they moved furniture around. He said, I saw then why he didn't want anything breakable around there. But Brutus lived to be a ripe old age. He said when by the time he passed, he'd already gotten white all around his muzzle. He was black everywhere else, but around his muzzle he turned white. And Mark said it was just the same thing as losing a family member. So they loved their dogs. And I do too.